Hi there, I'm Roger Mittag. I'm the founder of Prud'homme Beer Certification and also the president of a company called Thirst for Knowledge. We've spent well over the last 20 years helping people to understand a little bit more about beer, but there's a few things that I take for granted every once in a while. I assume that you know how to taste beer, and that's a false assumption. So last year when I was doing a class, a fellow that was in the class asked me if I had a blueprint on how to taste beer. And I thought, what a brilliant idea. So thanks very much to Dan Pfister for suggesting that. But I wanted to take the time, I've put it down into print for some of my students, but I wanted to take the time to do this on video so that you had an opportunity to really understand the steps that you need to take in order to properly evaluate beer. Now, having said that, tasting beer and drinking beer are two completely different things. So when we drink for social activity. We're enjoying it with somebody else. We've got it in a nice big glass, and we're not necessarily thinking a lot about what's actually going on inside the beer. But tasting a beer, evaluating a beer, is about taking an objective analysis on how that beer is made and what's inside of it and how we can properly discuss it and all of those things that are involved around the complexity of beer. So there's about four major steps that I want to walk you through. So the very first thing that we want to do is we want to set up the environment. So when you're getting ready to taste beer, my advice is that you take the beer out of the refrigerator at least 45 minutes to an hour before you actually want to taste it. Now the reason behind that is, normally speaking, we drink beer at cold temperatures, and that's the way most beers are meant to be served. Nice and cold, clean, crisp, refreshing. But when we're evaluating beer, we need the right temperature to bring out some of the characteristics that might be muted by cold temperatures. So take it out of the fridge. I've taken mine out. I'm using a can today. But you can do the same thing with bottles. If you're doing bottles, just remember that if it's a brown bottle, you're cool. And if it's a green or a clear bottle, you really have to protect it from light. Otherwise, it's going to get light struck or skunky. So we've got the beer out. We're going to leave it for 45 minutes. It gives us lots of time to set up where we want to taste our beer. And this is part of that very first step. And this is a critical piece because we want to set up the right environment. So what you need to do is you need to find a space in your house, in your apartment, wherever you live, that's going to give you the right kinds of environmental areas that are going to allow you to completely view this beer in a perfect world. So first thing we want is an area with lots of light. So whether it's outdoor light or whether it's indoor light, you just need some really good light. It can't be in a dark space. You need a white background if you can. I've got tasting mats, so I use these things to put my beers down on so that I can actually see the colors the way that they're meant to be seen. If you put them down onto something dark like a bar top, you're not really going to see the true colors of it. It's going to distort the color. It's going to make it a lot darker. So nice light, white background. Get rid of all the distractions. So no cooking smells, no noise. Turn off the radio, turn off the TV, turn off your phones. Just shut it all down. Because what we want is our senses to be completely awakened by tasting these beers. And any other kind of distraction is really going to throw us off of what we're trying to establish. You want to make sure that you have a bottle opener just in case you're using bottles. And one of the key components that I look at is a notebook. So I've got notes that I use, tasting notes that we've developed at Prud'homme Beer Certification that are open to anybody. If you want to use our notes, just email me. You can find me at Roger Mittag or rmittag at thirstforknowledge.ca. And I'm happy to send tasting notes to you so that you can follow along like an expert. But if you just have a notebook, you can do the same thing. And I'm going to walk you through all the steps that you need to write down when you're doing this. Second thing, now you're going to start looking at the beer. And this is where I'm going to throw a little bit of caution out. So what we want to find is the alcohol by volume. So in this one is 5% ABV. That's what ABV stands for. And I want to really find out a little bit about the styles. So this particular one is Barking Squirrel from Hop City. It is an amber lager. So those are really the only two things that I want you to write down. The rest of the stuff on the back, just ignore it, because what happens quite often is the information that's on the back is provided typically for marketing purposes, and it could skew your brain into thinking that you're going to anticipate certain things about the beer. So we want to shut that all off and just come in completely objectively. So when we're ready, then we're going to go into step two. And now that we've got all the information ready, we know what we're tasting. Now we're going to open the beer. Oh, I forgot. You need glassware, clearly. So I love this glass. This is a stemless wine glass. It is 9 ounces in volume. That allows me to get about 5 to 6 ounces of beer in here with the right amount of foam. I've used this glass in the past as well. It's kind of a cool glass. I like the shape on it, and it flares up. I just found that it didn't really give me the kinds of aromas that I'm looking for. And I've done lots of testing on this. So this is my standard evaluation glass. This is a glass that we use in Prud'homme beer certification throughout the course. This is how we do our sampling. If you don't have a stemless wine glass, just grab a regular wine glass. You just need something that you can allow the bowl to open the aromas up. So we've got a glass. You want to make sure it's nice and clean. So how do you make sure a beer glass is clean? Well, you rinse it underwater. I run my glassware through our dishwasher, but I'm very careful about how I do it. Typically, lower rinse cycle is good. Got good rinse agents. High heat is really, really critical. If you want to hand wash these, 1 drop of detergent into the glass, run some hot water in there, put your hand over the top, you're not touching the inside of the glass, and then just shake the hell out of it. So you got nice froth, pour it out, and then run cold water under it or into it until all of the suds are gone. And then you got a really nice, clear, clean beer glass. And that's what we want. We don't want any bubbles on the inside of these glasses. So we're going to open the can. When you pour, you can afford to be a touch more aggressive than you would be if you were pouring into a glass that you're going to drink. So I'm going to pour almost straight in, just a small angle, straight in from a little bit of height because I want foam. Foam is the critical piece that we're going to look at. So we're going to hold the glass up to the light and we're going to look first. In my classes, we teach you to look first and not smell first. And there's reasons why. So we want to look first, and the main reason is that the head can collapse extremely quickly, and we want to get an idea of what the foam looks like and what the beer looks like based on our initial observations. The aromas can wait for us for a bit. So the first thing I see in this one is I'm looking at the foam. Foam is nice and creamy on the top. It's got really, really small, tight bubbles. And the color of the foam is very important because that tells you what kind of malts are being used. In this case, this foam is an ivory color. It's an old ivory. Cream is a good way to describe it as well. You can use bone. There's all kinds of really cool color descriptors that you can use to paint a beautiful picture. The beer is clear. So in most beers, we're using words like clear, hazy, and cloudy. Now, just to give you an idea, clear, I can read right through it. I could put a newsprint up or a magazine. I could read the text on the other side. Hazy means there's a slight veil. It means I can still make out shapes, but I can't read it crystal clear. Cloudy obviously is opaque. That means I can't see a thing through it. So those are the descriptors that I use all the time. And then I'm going to go to color. And this is where things get really interesting. So I've picked this beer on purpose today because I find that amber lagers and amber ales, you can get into these really, really cool descriptions. So we can say amber, of course, but for me, I like copper, rust, caramel, whiskey is great. Some people look at this beer and think that it looks like apricot or peach, which is cool. I think any way that you can describe a beer that is more romantically inclined to ask somebody to try that beer, the better it is for us as a whole within the beer industry. So we've got color, clarity, and the foam. So that's the biggest thing. Now we're going to go to step 3. Step 3 is where we're going to start smelling because the nose is really what's going to light us up. So on our taste buds, we've got roughly 6 different tastes, possibly 7 that they're playing with, and I'll get to that in a bit. But in our nose, we have the ability to smell thousands of different aromatics. And our nose is tied into our brain and into our memory. So the nose is here because it's what allows us to smell and anticipate something before we actually put it into our mouth. So we have to smell first. So when you smell, you're going to go into the center of the glass. So you have to get your whole nose into the center of the glass. You're only going to go in for maybe a couple of seconds because short sniffs are the best. You don't want to oversaturate your nose with too many aromatics. So the first thing I smell on this one is caramel. And I smell whole grain toast, a little bit of nuttiness in there as well. And then I'm going to do that 2 or 3 times, just down the center. And every time you smell something, write it down. Just write it down. It's when you write your observations down, you write them in order of the way they happen, not in what you think they're going to happen, but in the order that they're going to happen. So a lot of times people will say, I don't know, I don't have a really good sense of smell. And my discussion with anybody who says that to me is that's probably not true. It's probably you have a great sense of smell. You just haven't learned how to define it. And I think the biggest issue for us when we're evaluating beer is that we go through our lives so quickly when we're eating and drinking and having conversations that we're not really taking time to be in the moment to appreciate everything that's in the drink or on the plate. So, one of the big things that you'll always hear me say from here on in is try to be in the moment and try to be mindful. So, by mindful, what I'm suggesting is you stick your nose in there and immediately you should be saying to yourself, what is that? Like, what's that smell? Well, I smell something sweet. Okay, if you smell something sweet, now can you isolate where that sweetness is coming from? Is it fruit sweetness, or is it candy sweetness, or is it sugar? Because sweet is not a smell, sweet is a taste. So we have all these other things that we can smell that are very specific, but we're trying to isolate them to figure out exactly what the characteristic is that we're smelling. So in my example, I smelled caramel right off the bat, a little bit of brown toast with honey on it. There is some fruity notes in here, so fruit is probably going to be a little bit more on the stone fruit side, so peach, apricot, and there definitely is nuttiness in this beer. So more almond, a little bit of hazelnut in there, so more of the sweeter nuts. Yeah, it's really important to try to get down as far as you possibly can. I mean, when we start out tasting, it's really easy to say this is fruity, this is bready, this is sweet. But as you go further down the path, it's really important to start going down one level at a time. You know, is what kind of fruit is it? Is it hanging fruit? Is it stone fruit? Is it dried fruit? Or what kind of bread is it? Is it white bread? Is it whole grain? Is it brown? Is it pumpernickel? Those are the kinds of things that eventually, as you go down the path of tasting beer, that you'll be able to get to those levels. And it's just a matter of training. That's what you do. So now here's a little trick. Um, I take about 20 to 30 minutes to taste a beer if I'm evaluating it and I'm writing everything down. So that's what I would suggest that you do. But what'll happen is you will get overwhelmed, or your palate or your nose will just get overwhelmed with too much going on. So if that happens, what you do is you smell your forearm because your skin is what you know. That's your neutral. And once you smell your forearm or your skin, then that brings you back down to neutral. It sort of neutralizes your nose and cleanses your nose so that you can go in and actually smell some more. So down the middle. Now, here's the interesting thing about beers is a lot of the aromas that we smell in beers are what we call volatiles. And volatiles escape quickly out of liquid, and it's carbon dioxide in beer that drives those volatiles out. So, what you should be doing at this point is starting to work around the outside rim of the glass because some volatiles come up the middle. So, where our nose is going in there and it comes up the middle, and other volatiles come sliding up the outside of the glass. And this is where some of the more subtle characteristics and the more complex characteristics actually exist. So now we're smelling, more of the nuttiness is coming out. I'm getting a little bit more artisanal honey on this particular one. Raisins, a little bit of dates. It's kind of reminding me of a butter tart. And definitely lots of caramel still. That's still the dominating characteristic in this particular beer. Okay, so we've spent about 3 to 5 minutes so far on aromatics, and now it's time to taste it. So the other thing I can tell you is that if you're tasting a beer, especially lighter lagers, and you're finding it very difficult to get any kind of aroma out of it, put it into your mouth right away, because your mouth will then connect with your olfactory system, which is your nose, and you'll be able to start smelling things a little better. So now we're going to take a sip. And on our first sip, what we're going to try to assess is the carbonation level, the finish, the aftertaste, and the mouthfeel, and then we'll come back to the flavors that are in our mouth. So when you're trying to assess carbon dioxide, what you do is you pull the beer through the front of your mouth, right over top of your lips, draw it in through the tip of your tongue, and you'll feel it tingle or you'll feel it slide in nice and smooth. So that's what we want to do there. Then we're going to take a good sip. We're going to hold it in our mouth for about 2 to 3 seconds, and then you can swallow. Immediately upon swallowing, you want to be mindful enough to be right in that moment and say, okay, where did it go? Is it still in my mouth or is it already gone? That's what finish is. Finish is about the speed at which the beer exits your palate. Then we're going to look at aftertaste. And aftertaste is how long it sticks around. So now we want to look and say, okay, is it still there? Is it back? And if it's back, is it going to hang around for a long period of time? And are there any flavors associated with the aftertaste? Because sometimes we just look at aftertaste as being bitter, but in a beer like an amber lager, the bitterness is probably going to be a little bit lower, but there's going to be other things there. Then we want to look at mouthfeel. So what is the sensation inside my mouth? Is it soft, creamy, carbonated, dry, sweet, sour? Like there's all kinds of characteristics that can be in our mouth. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second once I take my sip, and then we can move a little harder on this. So this has got some decent carbonation to it. Um, so I would say it's not lively, but it's a good amount of CO2. It was really nice and smooth as it came into my mouth. It was a moderate finish, so that means it didn't empty out right away. And it's got a moderately long aftertaste, and the aftertaste is a little bit more on the caramel and nutty side. So it's leaving a little bit of those same flavors that we found in the aromatics. It's leaving that on my palate. It's a bit dry right now, which is fine. Dryness is good because what it does is it drives a thirst quenching characteristic, and it makes your saliva glands secrete, making your brain want more of what it is. So dryness in beer, excellent. Then we're going to take a second sip. The second sip is going to start revealing more of the flavors. And when I say flavor, flavor is not just taste, it is taste and aromas combined. So what we're looking for now is an open book to what this beer is. We're not going to sit there and say everything that we smelled we should be tasting, because that's not necessarily the way this goes. But in this particular case, we'll take another sip. And we start thinking about what it is that we're tasting. And for me, I taste way more of the whole grain bread or the dark bread up front. I don't really get a ton of the caramel up front on this beer. So my aromas, even though they're in a certain way, they don't necessarily come the same way when we put the beer into our mouth. So I'm getting a little bit more of the whole grain bread, a little bit more of the artisanal buckwheat honey. So there's a little bit more savoriness in this one. And then I'm getting probably toffee as opposed to caramel. So it's smelling more sweetness, but now I'm getting a little bit more burnt, and also say toasted walnuts, pecans, in that way. So when you're doing this, just take your time. I can't reiterate this more every time I do this, is to try to be in the moment and let the beer come to you. I think sometimes we have a habit of looking at beers or understanding beer styles and then searching for the things that we expect. You're going to find exactly what you're looking for if you take that approach. And it's a lot more challenging for us to sort of sit back and let the beer come to us. It requires a lot of discipline, and it requires a lot of, I guess, painstaking training at first, although, I'm talking about drinking beer and tasting beer, and it's not really that painstaking. So, yeah, try not to have expectations. You're writing everything down as you're going. Now, here's one last little thing. Um, there are things that we have to take into consideration. And I talked about what some people believe is the seventh taste on our tongue, and that is metallic. There is some research going on right now that wants to look at the ability to taste metallic characteristics as the seventh taste. So the six other tastes are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, fat is a taste profile now, and umami, which is described as savory. So those are the things that we get with things like mushrooms and roast beef and earthiness. That's really umami. Soy sauce is another good one. Cured meats. So the seventh one is metallic. And metallic is really interesting because a lot of people are very susceptible to tasting metallic. Now, if you don't know what metallic tastes like, it tastes like pennies or blood. Normally speaking, metallic is a flaw in brewing, and that's not something that we want to have. So sometimes metallic is disguised as metal, but is really minerality, and that could be coming from hard water. Minerality is like wet stone. You think about if you go outside when it's just finished raining and you can smell that wet stone. That's what minerality is, and that's really derived from the mineral content in the water. So, how do we find out if a beer is really metallic? So, there's a little test that you can do. What you do is you dip your finger into the beer. So, I got a little bit of beer on my finger. I'm going to rub it on the fleshy part of my fist right between my thumb knuckle and my forefinger knuckle. So, I've got this beer sitting in this fleshy part. So, now what I want to do is I want to smell that. Well, if it smells like blood or pennies, then you have a problem. If it smells like beer on your hand, you're good to go, and it's just minerality. So you write minerality down in your notes. So that really is our blueprint to tasting. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you take the time to sit and evaluate beers because drinking beers is a lot of fun, especially when we have people around us that we're socializing with. But finding out if a beer is well made is a little bit more of a step forward, and that's something that you can easily do on your own. Like I said, if you need tasting notes, you can find it through our website at tfkbeer.com. You can contact me directly. Make sure that you like our videos and that you subscribe to our YouTube channels. We've got a tremendous amount of material on YouTube, and we're going to continue to put more things on there. We're really active on social media like Instagram, Twitter, and also Facebook. So make sure that you follow us, come to our classes. We've got some great instructors, and we've got a wonderful program that runs online that is second to none from a beer education perspective. So thank you very much.